Every Sunday school teacher tells you this commandment means obey your parents. The early church would have found that answer almost laughably shallow. They read it, and some of them died for it, as something far bigger than a rule for children. By the end of this video, you'll understand why. Hello, I am Father Felix, and thank you for listening. To understand why this commandment mattered so much to the first Christians, you have to understand who they were up against. In the Roman Empire, the household wasn't just a family, it was a small political unit. The father was called the pater familias, and Rome itself was built on that same word. The emperor was pater patriae, father of the fatherland. Loyalty to your family and loyalty to Caesar as father were woven together on purpose. So when a Christian said, I honor my father and mother, but I will not call Caesar my father and I will not offer incense to him, that wasn't a private personal choice. That was treason. Around the year 110 AD, less than 2 decades after the Apostle John died, a bishop named Ignatius of Antioch was marched across the empire in chains to be thrown to wild beasts in Rome. In his letters along the way, he wrote about fatherhood, obedience, and honor constantly. Not because he was being sentimental, because for men like him, this commandment had just gotten him a death sentence. That's the world this verse was actually being lived in. Not a classroom, a courtroom. Before we get to the early church's reading of it, we need to go back further to where the commandment actually comes from. Honor your father and mother is the 5th of the 10 commandments, and it's the only one of the 10 that comes with an explicit promise attached. That your days may be long in the land the Lord your God is giving you. Notice what that promise is tied to. Not personal happiness, not a peaceful household, the land, meaning the covenant itself, the whole future of Israel as God's people. That's the first clue that this was never primarily about a child's obedience to a parent's rules. It's about something continuing, a people, a promise, a way of life, being carried from one generation into the next. Honor your father and mother, and the covenant survives. Dishonor them, and it dies with you. Keep that thread in mind because it's exactly the thread the early church picked up and ran with, just in a direction almost nobody expects. For a Jewish family in the first century, and for the first Jewish Christians, honoring your father and mother meant something very concrete, receiving the faith from them and becoming someone who could hand it on. Fathers were commanded elsewhere in the law to teach their children the commandments when you sit at home, when you walk along the road, when you lie down, and when you get up. Mothers carried and passed down the oral memory of the family story with God. To honor them wasn't just do what they say, it was to receive what they were entrusting to you, and to treat that inheritance as sacred. So when a child dishonored a parent, in that world, they weren't just being a difficult teenager. They were treating the transmission of the covenant, the entire project of God's people continuing to exist, as something worthless. This is why the early Christians reading this commandment didn't hear, be a well-behaved kid. They heard, you are responsible for whether this faith survives you. That's a completely different weight to carry, and it's about to get bigger. Here's where it gets interesting, because the church fathers didn't just apply this commandment to biological parents. They applied it to the church herself. One of the most famous lines in early Christian writing comes from Cyprian of Carthage, a bishop who was martyred around 258 AD. He wrote, "He cannot have God for his father who has not the church for his mother." Read that again. Cyprian is taking the exact structure of the 5th commandment, father, mother, honor, and mapping it directly onto your relationship with God and the church. God is father, the church is mother, and the honor you owe them isn't optional or symbolic. It's the same category of honor Moses commanded on Sinai. This wasn't a one-off metaphor. You see bishops in this era repeatedly referred to as spiritual fathers. You see the church described again and again as mother, a title that survives all the way into the catechism of the Catholic Church today. The early Christians believed the commandment had 2 layers operating at once. Honor the parents who gave you natural life, and honor the church and her shepherds who give you supernatural life. Miss that second layer, and you're only getting half the commandment. And most of us, most of the time, are only getting half. So what does this actually ask of you today? If the early church is right, then honoring your father and mother was never just about how you talk to your parents at Thanksgiving dinner. It's about whether you see yourself as a link, someone responsible for receiving a faith you didn't invent and handing it forward to people who come after you. That reframes almost everything. Parents, are you treating the handing on of faith to your children as the actual point of parenting or as one item on a long list? Godparents, do you take that title as seriously as the early church did, as a second spiritual fatherhood or motherhood you'll answer for? And for every one of us, do we honor the church Imperfect as her human members are, the way Cyprian said we owe honor to a mother, this commandment was never really about compliance. It was about continuity. It was about whether something sacred survives because you chose to carry it. So, still think this commandment is just about obeying your parents? The early church would tell you it's about whether the faith itself has a future. And that responsibility didn't end with them. It's sitting with you right now. If this changed how you read a verse you thought you already knew, it's worth remembering that while we are always growing, his love endures. Subscribe, and I'll see you in the next one, where we'll look at other overlooked phrases in the Bible. Thank you for joining. I am Father Felix, and God bless to you and your family.